Welcome to Commercial Property Roadshow with Helen Tarrant. Now today we're going to be talking about metro versus regional properties. There's always a lot of question and a lot of controversy of where should I buy my property? Should it be metro? Should it be regional? What are the risks associated with it? So today I'm going to cover with you in this video the risks of commercial in regional or metro areas so that you get to see the full picture so that you can help you on your journey of buying your first commercial property. But remember, hit subscribe and also the bell so you can get more notifications on my more upcoming videos on commercial property. Let's launch into it. Hi, this is Helen Tarrant. Should I buy in regional or should I buy in metro? And what about, is there a hybrid model? If you are buying in a metro area, now there is going to be firstly a lot of competition because most people like to invest local and their mindset is I need to invest local because it's going to be secure and because I can drive to it and because just in case something happened to the tenant, I can be there on site. Now, you really got to have to think about that rationale. So if something did happen to the tenant and they packed up and left, what does being on site mean? Are you really going to get anywhere being on site with them? Or is it because of the legalities around your lease? I mean, are you going to be able to turn up and stop them from leaving? So really, is that really valid or is it just a mindset and an irrational fear? Because investing shouldn't be about irrational fears. It should be about working out a strategy. So metro, what are some of the great things about in metro? Firstly, you've got a lot of population, you've got a lot of potential tenants in the future, so it's a shorter retenancy process. So you might get a new tenant anywhere from 2 weeks to maybe 2 to 3 months, depending on the state of the property it is and the location, but also more like the state of the property. And also you get higher capital growth in the future because in a metro area, as the area builds up, as there's more gentrification in the suburbs and also more services surrounding it, it starts to be a hub and then that growth happens as well. So you have that component, but also the rents are very expensive. So sometimes that means that your tenant may not actually be able to afford your rent, which can create issues in the future. Because if other new developments are coming up, and usually that happens in metro areas, there's lots and lots of new development, your rent could be impacted where you have a need to reduce your rent purely because you want your tenant's business to survive because you work in alliance with your tenants. So that's one of the downsides of metro, that you might have lots of other developments and lots of other competition your tenants can choose from because they could rent your premise out or they could go down the road and still be in this hub, but the run down the road might be 20% cheaper. So you've got that competition as well, so your tenant can pick and choose. You can have, obviously you have access to better type of tenants, but also you have access to much more transit tenants, because in metro areas what happens is that the tenants tend to start out and they don't really know how their business is going to track. So they might start out with a team of 2 or 3 people. They get into a 50 square meter premise, and it can be retail, office, any of those properties, and they decide in 2 years time the business has boomed. They all of a sudden they need 10 people and it just doesn't fit into that premise anymore, so they have to move. Now that's one thing. So they go to a larger premise, but then maybe in the next 2 years, something happens to the business and it contracts and they go back to 4 people. So they have to go to a smaller premise. So the business goes more up and down as well. And you have that in all sorts of businesses around metro. And that's just what happens. The area changes, or there's some even road works or whatever happens to that property. There's other things that happen in the area, in the big community, that could affect the business. And as a result, you have more transit type tenants as well. So good and the bad as well. Now, also properties in metro areas tend to be a lot more set and forget. So you don't have to worry about a lot of things, because most of the time when you buy a property in metro area, it is going to be a strata property or underbody corporate, unless you're spending millions of dollars on it. So if it's strata or body corporate, they're going to be taking care of the property. So you don't have to take care of the property as much. So you only have to take care of the internals. And most of the time, the internals are taken care of by your tenants as they fit out the property. So therefore, it's a lot more set and forget as well. But also, once your tenant fitted out the property, your tenant's maintaining it. But if you were to contribute or help the tenant to, as part of the refurbishment, as an incentive, you might find that, it's going to cost you a little bit more as well. So there's always pros and cons as well. And also compliance is a little bit different in the city just because of the high density as well. So your fire compliances might be different. I might find that you get a higher body corporate fees, and then there occasionally might be strata levies to, for lifts, air conditioning, and also roofing issues. So, the pros and cons. So in a metro area, you definitely get better capital growth, shorter retenancy rates, a much higher caliber of type of tenants, but the downside is it is going to be more expensive for you to get into the property market in a metro area, and you will have more transit tenants because tenants' business contract, tenants' business go down. Sometimes you have to work with a tenant. Also, fit out costs and tenant incentives can be higher, and you may have special levies to, serve for the lifts and things like that you might have come up against. So it is a passive investment and a set and forget, but you might have additional cost in it as well. But to think about in the back end, in capital growth, you will make up for that cost as well. So that's metro properties. What about regional properties? What's a good area, or where should you invest in regional properties? Now, regional properties, I'd normally target a much larger population. So I'm looking at the larger towns. So large regional towns, there's many large regional towns all around the eastern seaboard, going anywhere from Adelaide all the way up to Cairns. There's many large regional towns. They tend to be inland, and they tend to follow the route if you're going up north. So if you follow that, and also there's regional towns, large regional towns on the seaside border as well. So those large towns are ones I tend to target. So the larger the regional town, the better. So I'm talking about your Woggers, your Albury-Wodongas, areas like that, areas even like Grafton, which, doesn't have that much going for it because it's an inland town, but, again, it's much larger because it's got the population density, and even all the way further up to your Rockies and your Townsvilles and, into Cairns. So all of those areas, because they've got a large density of population, because the retenancy period in regional is going to be longer. So it's going to be longer because there's not as much supply for tenants as there is in metro areas. So you might have to budget anywhere from 3 to 6 months retenancy. Now, ideally, if you are going out and you're going to be marketing the property and you're taking care of the property, so the property is not a dump, it looks nice enough for people to inhabit, so you don't have to, with any commercial property, you don't have to go out and sort of make sure it's got beautiful tiles or that it's totally painted and the lighting is just right. No, it just has to be neat and tidy for someone to come in and occupy. As long as it's neat and tidy, someone can occupy straight away. You'll find that it's very easy to find a tenant, but you also have to market and be able to meet the market with the demands in terms of rental incentives, or helping the tenant out with refurbishments or fit out. So it might take you longer to actually find a tenant. So budget for anywhere from 3 to 6 months to find a tenant. So there's that. But also, regional areas have much higher yields. So what does that mean? It means that you actually have more cash in your pocket. So if you bought a property that had a tenant that was giving you a 9% yield as opposed to a 6% yield in a metro area, you're going to get twice as much cash flow coming in. And if you had a tenant on a 3-year lease, in a metro versus a regional, you'll find that the tenant from the regional is going to give you twice as much. So if you get a tenant from your regional that is going to give you $40,000 a year in passive income from $1 million purchase, that same $1 million, if you bought it in metro areas, is only going to give you 20. So while you might have a longer retenancy period, the property over the 3 years that you own it with the tenant in there is actually going to give you $60,000 more than the metro tenant. So you've got to work out how much is that worth to you, because maybe putting aside, out of that extra 60,000, 10 or 15,000 to help yourself re-tenant the property when it becomes vacant means that you're still ahead by about $40,000, and that may mean that buying in regional is a good decision for you. So these are some of the things to weigh up for you. But I can't emphasize enough, creating a bit of a buffer for yourself so that when you come to the retenancy period, you actually have that as well. But the other thing to look at in in regional is about the type of property. You definitely get more value for your money. So $1 million in a metro areas like Sydney and Melbourne, you are likely to get a strata property. So you're probably buying into a retail space or an office space or maybe a small warehouse space as part of a complex. But $1 million in regional is going to get you a freestanding building. So essentially buying a house. A freestanding building sometimes might have a couple of tenants in there, so it gives you that security. But having a freestanding building also means there might be a little bit higher maintenance costs, a little bit higher also for your insurance as well. So there's a few other costs, but it allows you to have more upsides to that property. So in the future, you could build an extension on that property. You could make the premise that's 2 into 3. There's lots of things you could do to that, and it's more flexibility than having a strata property. So that's one of the upsides, is getting more value for your money, and also higher yields so that you can create more buffer for when you actually come to the retenancy period as well. But also being in a regional town, especially if you decide to go to North Queensland, there's more general wear and tear on your property. So wear and tear on your property means, there's going to be more wearing on your roofs, there's going to be more natural storms, there's going to be natural sort of areas of flooding, there's going to be more winds. Those things may affect your property and the general wear and tear. So you can then mean that you can, for that type of property, you will need to have maybe additional insurance, or make sure that people are going there to check it, once a year to make sure it's really, those repairs are taken care of. So when you have a freestanding building, you need to look at, what that's going to cost you. But ultimately, that building is going to have more value, it's going to have more growth, especially even in a regional area. So you've got to combine the both and look at what really works for you, because you will get higher returns, you'll get more value for your money. But remember, there's a longer retenancy period, so really creating a buffer for yourself as well, and a strategy around that, and also type of tenant as well. Because we talked about the type of tenant in metro. So what happens to the type of tenant in regional? Tenants tend to be different, because tenants tend to come there and they tend to stay for a long time. They don't have the same fluctuations in the market. They're pretty stable. With a little bit of increases, they're pretty stable in this market. So what happens in that instance? Well, it means that once you get a tenant in there, they spend a fair bit of money on fit out and installing the premise, installing it and fitting it out to what they are, installing the equipment. And once they're there, they settle into the business and they tend to be there for the long term. You get much longer longevity out of your tenants in a regional area, purely because they just can't be bothered to move. And also, there is actually not a huge selection. So it's not like if you had a warehouse that had 300, 400 square meters, yes, there may be 10 warehouses, but they're mostly going to be occupied because the tenants don't move around so much. So the tenant don't really have the same amount of choice that they would in a metro area as well. So they're limited in choice, which keeps them there as well. So that's one of the upsides as well from investing in a regional area. So while you might have longer retenancy period, there are some upsides in investing in regional as opposed to metro as well. But metro, definitely you get the higher capital growth, whereas in regional you are not going to get that capital growth. It's going to be pretty steady. If you're going into a large regional area, it's going to be pretty steady. If you are going even further into more fringe regional or even into rural areas, you're going to have pretty much very little capital gains, if at all, over the next decade or so. But you're getting your cash flow up front, so you've got to measure that up to see whether that's important or not. So some of the things to think of as I wrap up this video is regional versus metro. Which one really suitable for you? Which one do you feel more comfortable with in your first purchase? And look at, regional, you're going to have your more value for your money. You're going to have tenants that are more stable, tenants that will have the longevity, but you're not going to have the same growth, and you're going to have more value, so you can be able to buy a whole property, freestanding building over a strata office. So metro, you're definitely going to get the higher capital growth. You're going to have lower yields, so lower cash flow in return, but you're going to pick up a lot in the back end, so that could jump dramatically. You're going to have more transit tenant, but it's going to be more set and forget for you, because it's going to be most likely it will be a strata property for you to start with, so very set and forget. And also, if you get the good location and you're able to meet the rental expectations of your tenants, your retenanting period are very short as well. So it's got that level of security for you. So when you balance it up, have a think about the different factors I've talked about and really consider where you want to be for your first commercial property. So until next video, make sure you hit subscribe, hit the bell so you get to hear my next notification and watch my next upcoming video, because I want you to be coming along with me on this commercial property journey and I want to help you into your first commercial property. So check out helentarrant.com if you want to find out more information about what I do. Bye for now.